Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. For those of you who've been here before, welcome to, if you haven't been here before, the World Bank Group Pavilion. It's a real pleasure for me to be here and to welcome you to this session. We're going to discuss how the Latin America and Caribbean region is committed to addressing the challenges of the climate agenda. At the World Bank, we are convinced that climate and development challenges cannot be separated from one another. Last year, we launched the first series of what we call the Country Climate and Development Reports, for short CCDR. And over the past year, we have completed reports for Brazil, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, and Honduras, working closely with many of you present here. And these 4 reports join 41 reports now completed of this kind. And today what we want to do is highlight some of the main findings, discuss possibilities for the future for these 4 countries, and reflect on some of the lessons that can be useful for other countries in the region and around the world. These reports cover many of the core challenges at the intersection of climate and development in a highly diverse region. While they're distinct in their focus and messages, there are also many common themes that emerge. Let me mention a few. First, there is no need to choose between climate and development. You heard me say it before. I'm saying it again because we really believe in it. It is possible to make headway on development goals, support inclusive growth, and take proactive action on climate. In Brazil, the implementation of a package of policies to end deforestation and increase productivity across diverse land-based activities could support approximately $95 billion in increased GDP while expanding forest cover by 16 million hectares. The restoration of forests can bring significant economic benefits. Colombia has the potential to mobilize an average of $1.1 billion per year in carbon finance between 2023 and 2035 from avoided deforestation, afforestation, reforestation, and improved forest management. In Honduras, a carbon price could yield up to 2.7% of GDP in additional revenue while achieving the country's nationally determined contributions, which is key to reducing emissions and adapting to climate change by 2030. Even more importantly, delaying climate action can have very serious consequences for achieving development goals in the region. For example, climate shocks could push up to 3 million Brazilians into extreme poverty by as soon as 2030. And by 2050, climate change impacts in the Dominican Republic are expected to decrease labor productivity by up to 9% in hot, dry futures. Second, preserving the region's natural capital is important to support climate ambition and sustain economic growth. Now let me talk a little bit about that. We know that continued deforestation and climate change could lead to a tipping point beyond which large areas of the Amazon basin start turning into a savanna. The economic impacts of reaching this tipping point are large. In Brazil alone, they could amount to $184 billion by 2050. Concerted action to preserve and restore forests is needed to reach domestic net zero goals. This is an important message for all countries in the Amazon basin, but also for many other countries in the region that have large forests that must be preserved. The third finding, in Honduras, before I get to the third finding that emerges, in Honduras, forest cover declined at a rate of 12% from 2010 to 2021, exceeding global and regional averages, driven in large part by agricultural expansion, similar to Amazon countries. We know the same is happening in Belize and Bolivia. The third emerging finding from our 4 reports is improving efficiency and effectiveness in the use of resources can open space for climate action. Many countries in the region are burdened with high debt service and tight budgets that constrain fiscal space. In this context, climate action may seem costly and ambitious climate goals may seem out of reach. But the CCDRs show us that there are ways to improve the efficiency and effectiveness in the mobilization of existing resources while making headway on climate action. In particular, redirecting subsidies can remove perverse incentives in existing fiscal policy. For example, the Brazil report shows current policies provide strong incentives for cattle ranching in the Amazon through subsidized rural tax credits. An outdated land taxation structure and large subsidies to the beef industry, amounting to $24.6 billion between 2008 and 2017. It's a huge amount. It is possible to repurpose a large part of these subsidies to encourage forest preservation instead of destruction and free up fiscal resources while still supporting the most vulnerable. And finally, the work that we have done in the CCDR suggests that the scale of the action needed requires mobilizing private capital. But for this to happen, a range of innovations are needed. For instance, in Colombia and the Dominican Republic, more than 70% of the initial cost for decarbonization, up to 2030, could be supplied by the private sector. Innovation and policy reform that enable the increased role of the private sector in climate action and to increase the resources available to respond at scale to the challenges the region faces will certainly be needed. Innovation is also needed across financial instruments, from catastrophe bonds and credits to insurance and public-private partnerships. At the World Bank, we're building on these findings. For example, in the Dominican Republic, the policy recommendations of the CCDR are directly informing the development of a new policy loan. In other words, informing reforms that could be considered. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to Felipe, who will kick off our discussion. Over to you, Felipe.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. We have a distinguished set of panelists. I'm very happy that they're all here. Let me introduce them very briefly. We have, first of all, maybe we'll go from my left to right, Miguel Ceará Hatton, who's the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources for the Dominican Republic. Then we have Sebastián Camilo Carranza Tovar, Director of Climate Change and Risk Management at the Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia. Then we have Jessica Ocampos, who is Managing Director and CEO of Camnexus Limited. That's a very different view from the government. It'll be very interesting to hear the contrast. And then we have Dr. João Paulo de Resende, a Special Advisor for Climate Change Economics at the Ministry of Finance of Brazil. So why don't we get started right away? Let me first ask a blunt question to the representatives of the two countries that have a big chunk of the Amazon. Of course, Brazil has the biggest chunk. Colombia has a significant piece of the Amazon. Let me just say I'm very happy that you are both here because you represent governments, administrations that have come in fairly recently with a very strong commitment to try to make the Amazon to preserve it and whatever development be sustainable. So thank you. Let me ask you very bluntly, maybe there's some question for both of you. If we are going to stop deforestation in the Amazon as soon as feasible, what are your governments prioritizing? What key measures? What can you tell us that in your government plans are the critical measures to stop deforestation? So maybe start with you, Joao.
I was going to ask Miguel to start. Just kidding. Sebastian, right? Sorry, Sebastian. No, I can start. Thank you. And it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Look, I think the challenge is so huge to stop deforestation in the Amazon region that we need every weapon that we can use. So we've started in Brazil. We've just had a 50% reduction in deforestation from the same period last year. 48, 49 point something.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you, yes. And we did this by revamping the original initiative that Brazil took in the first two terms of the Lula administration, which were 2003 to 2010, which is command and control measures, you know, pretty much just having police and environmental authorities going there and you know, busting certain illegal activities and burning and breaking machineries and equipment and so on. And we are reinvesting in this, and this is responsible for what we've done so far. But as Marina Silva, Minister of the Environment in Brazil, has mentioned, that is not enough. It cannot only be command and control. You got to have incentives so that the people that live in those regions and that need to provide for themselves and for their families, need income, they need alternative economic solutions. So that's why we are working on a series of initiatives and policies. One of them was recently announced, the work that we've been doing, lots of discussions. Svetlana is here to be my witness, with the World Bank included, on raising a fund internationally to try to transfer resources to forest countries and then somehow make that money get to the people that live in those local communities so that they will have a financial alternative other than taking down the forest. But we're also working with agriculture in Brazil, for example, trying to improve productivity so that they don't need to expand going further into the Amazon, but they can use the land more wisely and produce more within the same land. So there's also a program for that. I don't know, I could keep on going here, but I don't want to take so much time. We can come back to this.
Thank you. No, thank you, Joao. I think you mentioned some of the critical components, and I'm curious, Sebastián, if you could tell us if Colombia is following along the same lines or any big variations.
Thank you, Felipe. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you, Felipe, for the question, and thank you, Joao, also for sharing some views about what is happening in Brazil. I would like to mention that in Colombia we are also following new political approach regarding the reduction of deforestation. We are also very happy to share that as well. In Brazil, we are looking into a very interesting reduction of deforestation in the Amazonia region. We have a 70% of reduction on the same period in the last year, so this is a very good outcome. We have a 30% of reduction in net deforestation in Colombia regarding the previous period of analysis. So that was a reduction in 2022. It was a 30% reduction in 2022 compared to 2021. So this is a very good outcome, and the measures behind these results are basically, and I would like to start with this, saying that there's the peace process in Colombia. So we understand that the management of deforestation is clearly related with the peace consolidation process in our country. So it was included in the talks we have with in the framework of the agreement we already have with FARC. So that is part of that conversation, and it's also part with other violent groups, and it's also part of the safeguards that we need to put as a condition to start talking about this. So this is part of the current policy we have. So including the stop deforestation as part of the safeguards, we need to see to be confident and continue on this conversation with violent groups. The second one is more closer policy approach to the people living in front of the deforestation phenomenon. We moved the command and control instruments to the capitals behind deforestation instead of the people who is facing deforestation problem. So it starts with a direct conversation between the national government and local communities, trying to identify where are those people who are getting pay, who are obtaining the real monetary value of deforestation and are motivating these criminal activities in our country. So we moved the command and control instruments into a national committee with the Ministry of Defense, trying to find where are those people, instead of trying to find them in the territory because they are not there. Mm-hmm. So that is the second approach on this. And the third one is a policy that is trying to move from deforestation nodes to a forestal development nodes. So that it's more from the productive approach, trying to find the right economic activities, trying to engage people on the implementation of this policy that we are promoting to reduce deforestation. So working with the people, trying to build the policy together with them, trying to have a direct conversation with indigenous people from government to government, because indigenous people, they have their own governance. They have their own understanding of the land they are sharing with us. So this is challenging. That is not an easy task. It's not an easy task for a state, very centralized state like Colombian, to open doors and go to the territory and try to understand each other and try to understand how we can work together to stop deforestation. So that it's also part of the current policy we are implementing, and thanks to that policy, we have these numbers behind the reduction of deforestation in Colombia.
Thank you. Thank you, and congratulations also for those good numbers. Both countries have done very well in the last year or two, and this, I hope we can keep it up. Let's talk for a moment of a completely different case. Miguel Ceará, you're the minister in the Dominican Republic. You don't have the Amazon. But what I would like to point out is you share this island in the Caribbean with another country. When one flies over it, the Dominican Republic has done very well in keeping a lot of its forest cover, and I think it's one of the few countries that has expanded forest cover in recent decades. So you have something very well. Tell us a little bit, what are your challenges today with respect to forest cover and perhaps water?
Thank you very much, Felipe, but I was going to speak in Spanish. I don't. Okay. Mira, ciertamente nosotros tenemos una cobertura boscosa de un 42% del territorio, alrededor del 38% es foresta, el 5% restante es agroforesta. Tenemos un gran desafío porque tenemos la presencia en todas las zonas montañosas del país de población haitiana que mantiene todavía prácticas de corte para sembrar y genera fuegos, digamos, no digo voluntarios, pero sí se crean situaciones de mucho riesgo. Este año, en 6 meses, tuvimos más de 700 fuegos. O sea que es una situación muy compleja. Ahora mismo tenemos una campaña de regeneración, reforestación en toda la isla, en toda la parte nuestra, por supuesto. Nosotros estamos sembrando alrededor, el equivalente a unos 200 kilómetros cuadrados. Tenemos 48.000 kilómetros cuadrados, 200 nos permite regenerar y recuperar parte de lo que se ha deteriorado o se ha perdido. Esperamos sembrar alrededor de 20 millones de árboles. Es un proceso que es permanente, hay un compromiso nacional para 2 cosas. Uno, como sumidero de carbono, pero sobre todo, lo más importante, es para regular el nivel de agua en el país. Nosotros tenemos una lluvia alrededor de 1.500 milímetros y no tenemos mucha capacidad de almacenamiento. Algunas zonas del país se nos habían deteriorado mucho, entonces todo este esfuerzo que estamos haciendo es para regular el nivel del agua, obviamente servir como sumidero de carbono, y es un esfuerzo que está involucrando la población, el gobierno, la población, las comunidades, ¿no? En donde prácticamente todo el financiamiento viene de parte del gobierno.
Okay, no, muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Minister Ceará. Very different perspective, but very important. Now let's shift gears to Jessica. Jessica, you work on innovation and technology and private sector. And the one thing we didn't mention is, public sector can do a lot, but not all, and we need resources. And countries don't have all the resources, especially financial and also investment to generate jobs. We need the private sector. So let me first focus and ask you on innovation and technology. Tell us a little bit, what challenges do you see to ensure that sustainable exploitation, development of the forest can take place while keeping the forest from being deforested?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the question, and it's a pleasure to be sharing this panel here. Well, certainly there are challenges, as we have heard, but there's a lot of opportunities for the private sector have a role and actually is playing a role in this agenda. And if we think in one of the areas that were mentioned relates to make efficient productivity, like increasing yield, that means reducing our deforestation, degradation of the land, producing with more food with less water, energy, and land consumption. And the key here is innovation, as you said. I want to take a moment to reflect on innovation. Innovation, if we look at from the policy perspective, is an Oslo manual, is a new or significantly improved product or service that differs from the previous version, and it is made available, or is it used? So there are 4 important dimensions here. It is based on knowledge, it is novel, it's implemented, and it creates value. Those are the critical factors to consider something an innovation. Today, actually, we have available technology that can be used in order to tackle the different aspects mentioned. Technologies such as satellite imagery, networks of sensors in the ground, LiDAR, LoRaWAN technologies for data communication in Internet of Things. So there are plenty of opportunities. And all of these technologies have a common pattern, which they are enabling technologies. They are enablers, which means they don't have just one single purpose. They can be applied in several other things. So, but what I've seen in my experience is that when we focus these technologies as enabler in only one particular of these applications, they can become expensive, especially in our countries. And in order to make them more convenient, we need to think on them as a platform, technology platform that actually can derive value from all these different applications. For example, we can use the same infrastructure of network of sensors to monitor and alert of inefficiencies in the productivity, impact in the agriculture, farmer directly. We can use it to alert when there is a potential fire or that appears in a wildfire. We can also use it to detect when there's a risk of illegal actions in deforestation. And even the same infrastructure can help us to measure or quantify the biomass stock, which can be very useful in the market, in the carbon market, the same infrastructure. So, but what we need to do with that, how we do that, is so important that we have an approach that apply all these different stakeholders, and in this case, as a challenge probably, is that the government and the public sector can see and help all these stakeholders to come together and to find a commercially viable opportunity in this case. So if we are able to do that, I think that we can see one of the key challenges, which technology exists, but we just need to put it in a commercially perspective option.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica. And I think all our country climate development reports point to the importance of technology and innovation to help us in this task of our sustainable development of the forest. Now, let me get back to the 2 critical Amazon countries here and ask you now, shifting gears to the finance side. So your governments have very strong plans. You have some command and control, but you also need to engage the population, offer jobs, develop the bioeconomy. What kind of resource needs do you think you need, and what kind of climate finance tools? I think, Joao, you already mentioned one interesting one, an idea that Brazil has launched at this COP. But what additional thoughts do you have on the kinds of resources that you will need to make this transition as fast as possible?
So, again, I think you need a different approach to different situations of the forest. So you have places where the land belongs to the public sector, you have places where the land belongs to the private sector, private agents, and there are many places where the land doesn't belong to anyone. So then you need different financing strategies for those. one thing that has been happening a lot in Brazil, I mean, that which is a public good, we are trying to tackle it with public money, mainly donations, but also some money from the Brazilian budget. That, however, which belongs to the private sector, there has been many initiatives by the private sector themselves walking in, either working on with local communities, hiring local communities to conserve and preserve the forest that they own or where they live in, pay them some kind of payment for environmental services, and then try to generate a REDD Plus or a carbon credit on top of that, and then sell that today to the voluntary market. But we're just about to approve a regulated carbon credit market in Brazil, so maybe we could use that as offset. So we require our industries to reduce emissions. A certain amount can be offset with forests, then they can go and pay out to buy those credits from people, from companies that are paying for the environmental service provided by local communities. And there are other companies who are investing, some people talking 10 million hectares. Miguel was mentioning 2,000, no, 2,000, not Miguel, well, 200 square feet, which is 20,000 hectares. We're talking about 10 million here. The Amazon is just so big. Where companies are coming in and investing in reforestation, and for that they use technology sometimes. They use drones to monitor many times. And then again, but then they have to wait 7, 8, 9 years so that the forest will have captured enough carbon that they can monetize that in a market for carbon. For carbon. So that's already happening. They say when we talk to these companies, they say, look, we're with our heads just above the water because it's really, it's really expensive. We have a problem with not having enough seeds for reforestation. This is something that actually it didn't cross my mind, and I think it didn't cross the minds of many people. So you try reforestation, there are not enough seeds to plant trees for reforestation. But so the private sector is walking in with their own money, and then again, different approaches to different situations. I think that's the way we were looking at it. Got to use every single tool we have at our disposal.
Thank you. Sebastián, how is Colombia dealing with the need for resources for this?
Sure. Thank you, Felipe. That's a very, very important question because, and that's very interesting because I was in another panel a few minutes ago, and we were talking about the carbon budget. We are talking about the sense of urgency. So we already know that we need to act. We already know that there is not time remaining. We already know. We know many things, and the sixth assessment report of IPCC it's providing very, very useful information to understand what is the current situation. And the first question that arrives once we see those reports is, who will pay that, and how we're going to mobilize the resources we need in order to align our efforts into messages that we receive from science. So in the case of the Amazonia region, and not only Amazonia region, we have also a very rich forest in the Pacific Basin that we share with other countries in that part of our country, with Panama, Costa Rica, Ecuador. So we really need to create conditions to change the financial approach. It's not an easy task to create a real value of biodiversity. The current situation in my country is that we have very informal jobs, in some cases in illegal conditions, with a very cheap resource, which is land. So there is a misunderstanding of the reality. That is our source of wealth. Youth, people that is young people living in a very rich context of biodiversity, but the understanding of the system is that there is the place where the poverty lives. So that's the type of thing that we need to change. How we're going to do that? We need to create conditions to make biodiversity a source of wellness, we need to create conditions to align, for example, the private sector with the biodiversity and with the Amazonia region, and an ETS could be an instrument to do so. We already have a carbon tax in Colombia, which is including an offsetting scheme, and it is possible to use credits to avoid the payment of the tax. So we are creating these conditions to try to move financial flows into that reality that we have in a very rich and very biodiverse context like the Amazonia or the Pacific Basin. Another strategy we are following is understand that most of the investment we need in those contexts are public. And the fiscal space we have is not enough. There is not enough public money to go for the investments we need. Our president has been presenting these days his idea about the use of GCDRs, for example, as a source of public money to make those investments, or the type of investment we need in order to ensure human rights, in order to protect the people who is living, in order to provide other different sources of money different than those that are related to a criminal activity. So the understanding of the fiscal situation of our countries, try to bring that conversation into, for example, the G20 or the MDB's reform, that is also very useful to create conditions in order to have for the future the realistic financial flows to make the investments we need in those contexts if we are government that we don't have enough fiscal space to do those type of investments. So those are the types of activities. It's very important for countries to use instruments like CCDRs or like country platforms in order to be clear about what kind of investments we would like to promote in our countries, be very specific, which of those projects or programs are public, which are private, which could be interesting for a risk capital investor, which are 100% public, and be clear on portfolio of actions. We already present a portfolio in COP28. It is a 32 billion portfolio that we are presenting as a first step in order to go for the implementation of the actions we have in the NDC in Colombia. So that's the type of actions we have. Once you have that type of actions, you can put those activities into, for example, we have something that we call the Green Protocol with the private banks in Colombia. Inside of that protocol, we include those priorities. We are very specific regarding what is the role of that type of financial institutions, what we are expecting from them, and what they can expect from the government. So that's the type of strategies we are implementing in Colombia.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. So it's very clear that there's still a need for more resources, and we're looking forward to Brazil leading the G20 next year. The proposal made by President Lula on the creative forestry financing is an interesting one. But I want to shift our country. Climate reports talk a lot about the space that needs to be created for the private sector. We need to pull in the private sector. So, Miguel, Dominican Republic is a country that has been extremely successful in attracting a lot of investment, and it continues to grow its economy very well. How can you channel some of that interest from private sector into these tasks that have to do with reforestation, sustainable development? What kind of framework are you providing to try to channel those resources into this task?
En el ámbito forestal, se ha hecho un gran esfuerzo para garantizar la siembra con derecho a corte. Eso ha movido mucho al sector privado. Era un gran desorden, había un gran desorden, se prestaba para muchas cosas mal hechas y poco a poco estamos restituyendo la confianza en siembra con derecho a corte. Esa es una forma mediante la cual el sector privado invierte a largo plazo, a muy largo plazo, ¿no? Con expectativas de ganancia muy sustanciales. Otros factores que han influido ha sido todo el cambio en la institucionalidad en el país, ha ayudado mucho. El tema de la confianza que ha generado el gobierno en cuanto a los objetivos. De hecho, recientemente tuvimos un upgrade por las agencias, creo que fue Moody, no me acuerdo cuál fue, pero tuvimos un upgrade en este contexto tan complicado de aumento de precio de petróleo, etcétera. La política fiscal se ha manejado con prudencia, eso ha contribuido a atraer la inversión privada. Los marcos regulatorios, acceso al crédito, ha habido una política muy clara de facilitar acceso al crédito al sector privado. En fin, o sea, ha sido una combinación de circunstancias muy vinculada a la situación política. Creo que eso es un factor importante que ha explicado estos niveles de inversión. En los primeros meses, en los primeros 2 años del gobierno actual, 2 años y tanto, el coeficiente de inversión era del 30% del producto. Y prácticamente el 27, 26%, en algunos momentos hasta el 28% fue inversión privada. O sea, eso es un cambio importante en la dinámica económica del país.
Fantástico, gracias. Thank you very much, Miguel. So Jessica, our last question, along the same lines, you work a lot with the private sector. What do the private investors need? What are they asking? What do you hear?
Well, as I said before, a lot of my work relates to using innovation as a key driver towards closing the gaps in our sustainable development. That's my key area of work. And one of the key things is that we need to identify, as the public sector is really heterogeneous, the same happens in the private sector. So we have, in the process of making innovation happen, we have adopters and developers. And the role is dual in the private sector. So the process of making happen depends also a lot in the possibility and the active participation of the state. And not just as creating the right conditions, like sustaining a good environmental and innovation ecosystem for this to happen, but also as an active role actually decreasing the risk for others to come into play. So, as I said, from the developer perspective, in the very, very early stage, what we look is from the investors, they need to assess the technology, but they normally will not take the risk until they see it working and validated. And that is where the role of an state that is an early adopter can really help to create and validate that technology and as a product. And they later, when the technology is more mature, again, the private sector appears as an adopter, naturally. And that is where we need also to create the conditions that we create also specific applications. We were talking about application earlier, and realizing that the innovation asset can be also important for creating more invested asset go. So I think there are key things here of dual role of private sector and having, personally from my experience, I witnessed the small companies, SMEs, which are actually part of the engine of our economy, that they feel and they are keener to participate more in the sustainability agenda with innovation. But sometimes they feel that the mechanisms that exist, financially speaking, are not recognizing their role and not really acknowledging that they have a distinct way of being treated, and they also have a more inclusive approach in the innovation, taking into account of the communities. So local innovation to create local solutions for local challenges, which are also global, I think is needed, and the investors are looking for that.
Thank you very much for that, Jessica. And thank you to our panelists. Can we give them a round of applause? And for final remarks, may I introduce Alfonso Garcia Mora. He's our Vice President of IFC for Latin America and the Caribbean, and also Europe and Central Asia. He covers almost half the world, but please, Alfonso.
Thank you, Felipe, and thank you very much, panelists. Thank you, Anna. I think it's a great idea, actually, to bring together representatives from the private and public sector to discuss the main conclusions of an assessment that for us means a lot, the CCDRs, because it has really helped us to understand better, to prioritize better, and to define in a way our programs and how to bring the private and the public sector together. So hearing from you today is also a good example that actually these CCDRs are a good way to really go into that direction. No? I just wanted to highlight four points in my closing remarks. The first one that I believe is critical, that we have been mentioning since we started the CCDRs, is that climate and development, you don't really need to choose between one or the other. Both of them come together, and both of them need to come together. Back in the days, there was always a discussion if you prioritize or if you want to work on climate, if you had to leave development behind or vice versa. And I think that we have really proved with all the analytical work that the World Bank has brought that this is not the case and that we really need to work on those two aspects at the same time to really make it sustainable. Otherwise, we'll never be sustainable. The second point that I wanted to make is the relevance of forestry. You mentioned that, especially in Latin America, other regions as well, but I really believe that forestry and biodiversity is a key component of the climate agenda, and this is how we have been trying to internalize in our day-to-day work, not just in the CCDRs, but also in the global challenging programs that we have, or that we are developing. There is one of them out of the 6 that is precisely on biodiversity and forestry, where the Amazonia will play and is playing a critical role because of the impact that it has. And in that sense, I would like to mention that this is not just the traditional way of looking at forestry in terms of replanting and in terms of keeping the forests alive, but it is also how to develop the communities and the societies that live in those areas, no? Which is the only way that we can really think if we really want to achieve a sustainable development. No? The third point that I wanted to mention is precisely the relevance of the private sector. No? We know that the figures are there. We estimate in IFC that we need $150 billion a year of investments to achieve the climate sustainable goals. And this will never happen with public financing. It is obvious because there is no such a public capacity to finance it, and we need to bring the private sector. And the key thing here is what is needed in order to bring the private sector. I mean, what are the triggers, what are the enablers that we need to mobilize this capital for the private sector? Because this is not a question of private sector do not want to invest. No, private sector may want to invest, but we need to create the conditions for that. No? And here is in my view, one of the big assets of the CCDRs, really identifying what are the policy enablers, what are the regulatory enablers that will allow the private sector to come in. And this means analyzing and going in depth into the subsidies, for instance, going in depth into the incentives that we have in the economies to create the enabling environment for the technology, for innovation. You need to have the incentives to do that. And also, not a minor point, to create the taxonomies and the standardization that will allow the private sector to understand what they invest and the institutional investors to understand in what they are investing. And this is not a given. We know that there still exist dozens of different standards on green bonds, on blue bonds, on sustainable bonds around the world. No? So this is something that the World Bank Group is also working very closely. We did it in Colombia. We are doing it in Brazil. We are doing it now in Peru, in Central America, really trying to help the superintendents and the financial sector to define an asset class that can be recognized as such internationally. No? With that, I just wanted to close. Again, thanking all of you for being here today. Thank you, Anna, for your opening remarks, and thank you, Felipe, for moderating this panel. Thank you.